I would be thinking about you as I was recovering.
Yeah, that's what I, that's the
On game controllers. Here, there's app library and widgets on your home screen.
About how like LSDs is being used to like kind of treat anxiety and depression. Um, I've heard of that, and I've heard people talk about it. So can you explain why these type of drugs can kind of aid people with mental illnesses and other types of diseases going on with them?
Well, I don't know that much about the science behind it.
Okay.
What I can tell you is the history behind it, which is that this is one of the big things that when LSD became popular in the middle of the 20th century, we
Mhm.
have people like Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters out on the West Coast who thought LSD is fun. Everyone should take LSD, and it's this great recreational drug. It'll get you out of your normal sort of middle class hangups and turn you into a hippie. And that was one way of looking at it. But also people on the East Coast, people like Das Ram and what's the name of that the big famous guy, the big proselytizer for
Dang.
Timothy Leary. That's who we mean, right? Timothy Leary. He was
Timothy
very
Leary.
serious about it. He thought that LSD and also other hallucinogens like mushrooms and peyote, these things are really going to be good for you spiritually. And they're going to help you open up sort of other doors of perception and come up with a different way of looking at life. And he was very much, not so much about medicine, but about spirituality. It's going to open up a whole new way of seeing the world, LSD. And so there's the famous incident where the Merry Pranksters were on their bus trip, on their magic bus throughout the United States. And they met up with them in Millbrook, I think it was, in upstate New York in the Hudson Valley, where Leary and his guys were. And they didn't really mesh so well because they have very different visions about what LSD should be for.
Mhm.
But of course, LSD has been illegal for a long time, and it still is. But researchers at places like Johns Hopkins have been using it. They've gotten permission to do trial experiments where they're giving people small doses of LSD under very supervised conditions. People who have terminal illness, for example, who are very afraid of dying, as one can well understand, and how going through this experience of taking LSD can really help them sort of overcome their fear, sort of get a different understanding of where they are in their life, and it's helpful to them. And then there's a novelist named Ayelet Waldman. She wrote a book a couple years ago, published it, about how microdosing LSD, which is another thing that people are looking at, taking very small doses of LSD, like I don't know if it's daily or weekly or what it is, but taking very small doses, not enough to give you, a so-called trip like
Mhm.
people use recreationally, but small doses that just sort of help rebalance the chemistry in the brain and, have really, she thinks, and other researchers also think, helps people with anxiety and depression.
And that's a very cool thing because I remember, and as you said, in the mid 20th century, so around like the 60s and 70s, was kind of like the height of the LSD craze. And we kind of seen it die down through the 80s where the cocaine came in, and the 90s and the early 2000s. But now we're starting to see, at least in my eyes, in popular culture, we're starting to see more of a rise in use of LSD. Recently, there was a documentary that came out about it on Netflix that I watched. You see a lot of people mentioning more or being more open talking about it, whether it be some actors or rappers. And you see a lot of
Who's
people.
talking about it? I haven't heard anything. I'm
So,
not so much up to date on what's going on right now.
so like Seth Rogen and like I know like Kid Cudi, he's a rapper. He talks about it often. Seth Rogen, they'll be open and talking about it. And the whole documentary, it was like a list of like different celebrities from like Carrie Fisher, Anthony Bourdain, ASAP Rocky, some other comedians is talking about their use of like LSD. You haven't
And
seen
they're
the
talking about
documentary?
are they taking trips or are they microdosing?
Oh, they taking trips.
Okay.
So they was like the whole documentary is talking about their experience with it, and it's kind of like at the same time as it's using the documentary is used to like talk about their experience, they're also like giving tips throughout, like, hey, don't drive while doing this,
Yeah.
like, and it's funny when you look at it, but like it's just for people who never used the drug, it's like it's detailing the experiences of like trips and just give these wild stories that these people went through. It's very interesting. I
Yeah,
forgot
well,
what
I'll have to look that up. Yeah.
I forgot what it was called, honestly. But it's on Netflix, and it was trending for like a couple of weeks. You'll be able to find it. It's still on there.
Okay. Sounds good. It's also microdosing is taken off apparently in places like Silicon Valley. People
Really?
think that it helps them. Yeah, people think it helps them work, sort of focus better and work harder, which is not at all what Leary and Casey and those guys thought that LSD should be for. But that's what that's what they're doing. That's what they do with everything in Silicon Valley, trying to optimize your performance, right? All that kind of stuff. So they're doing that there too. So it's become a little bit like Ritalin or Adderall as well, like
Yeah.
these other drugs.
And it's crazy when you think about it, because as you said, like people just microdosing it. But if you take like a whole entire, like say, if it's an acid case, a whole entire tab or mushrooms, you go from just using it to optimize your abilities to like taking this big grand trip or something.
Yeah, well, this whole microdosing thing is relatively new, I believe. It's interesting about LSD because when I introduced the 1960s and 70s in the class, I asked the students like, how many people would know where to get marijuana, right? And of course, the first time I asked, like everyone sort of looks around and no one wants to raise their hand, but then they just say, I'm not going to get you in trouble. So almost everyone knows where to get marijuana if they want to get marijuana, right?
Right.
And I asked them, and the point was that this is new, right? And then before the 1960s, with the counterculture and the hippies and all that kind of stuff, that it was hard to find all these drugs. They're all different subcultures. Like marijuana is found at like jazz clubs and places like that, but it's not just everywhere in the culture. And so I also asked people where to find, if you wanted to find heroin, who could find it? And it's not nearly as many people as marijuana, but it's increased over the last few years. And LSD, I was surprised at how many people, and then that also has increased, I think, over the last couple of years of LSD. So maybe LSD is having a little bit of a comeback.
I feel like it is because, as I said, like it's being talked about a lot more in popular culture, and people are talking about, like, it was funny because me and my friends who was joking about it, and they were saying how like people and like in the hood were starting to use LSDs and psychedelics. I was like, what? They getting like, so it's becoming more accessible. But in this time with like fentanyl being used and like people mixing drugs, they got to be very careful with using it. But it's becoming more accessible, and I think, honestly, when you look at some of the use of a LSD and how we talked about it is used to cure like some anxiety or depression, and maybe if you take like a big dose of it, it can kind of give you a new look and experience on your spirituality and life itself. It can be very helpful if, like with any drug and most things, if you don't abuse it, if you don't abuse the drug.
I'm not advocating for any of this stuff. I'm just explaining what
Right.
history is behind all these things. I'm not saying go out and take LSD.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not advocating it. I'm just saying, like, as we said, like the use of it can be used for those positive reasons.